Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Welcome back to the couch series. It's been so nice and so refreshing to have you guys come with me on this journey of understanding ourselves better and learning on various things to do with mental health and psychology and self-awareness. And in line with self-awareness, today we're going to be speaking about a topic that is very dear to my heart, and that is how your childhood affects your adulthood. And to discuss that with me, I have my good friend Maddy, who is a therapist that specializes with children and teenagers. So I'm just going to let Maddy introduce herself, tell us what she does and who she is, and then we're going to get right into the nitty-gritty of the topic.
Okay, thank you for having me here, Sharon. Hi guys, my name is Maddy, or the longer name is Madeline Bayre, and I am a counseling psychologist who specializes in children and teenagers. And I'm very excited to be here and to have these conversations. Indeed, it's conversations between two professionals, but also between two friends.
Yeah. I mean, we have this conversation as friends, you know, like every time something happens, we call each other and we have these conversations. So first of all, I want to start with, I'm going to start it easy. And I want us to speak about how your childhood affects your relationship. And I think for the longest time, this is something I've shared in one of the other videos, that until recently, I didn't know that a lot of my childhood experiences made an impact on how I was dating and how my relationships were set up. So I want us to talk more about that.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. And I like that you're starting there, because I mean, human beings are relational beings, and indeed most of our conversations are actually because of situations we've been in relationships. And just generally, anything that happens to us in childhood, whether positive or negative, impacts us because it forms, you know, children are forming who they are, their subconscious mind, their experiences, they are learning what to do with boundaries and things like those. So with regards to relationship particularly, and this is something actually Sharon has done at her IGTV, and the main thing, or the main way that children feel connected to the people who take care of them is when they form like an attachment with them. So everything, how our childhood affects our adulthood is often, the backbone is often with regards to attachment. And attachment is just basically the quality, if we could put it just in a way people can understand, the quality of the relationship between the child and the caregiver.
Your primary caregiver.
Yes, their primary caregiver.
So I'm going to, you know, just list down the different attachment styles. So there's the anxious attached, there's the avoidant, and then there's the secure. And within those, there are many other categories that I really won't get into. But for example, we are opposites in our attachment styles. So I'm going to give you an example of mine, and she'll give you her own experience. So for me, my primary caregiver, we had an on and off relationship. It was inconsistent, meaning sometimes she would show me care, she would show me love, she'd show me safety, which I needed as a child. But other times, that wasn't the case, because maybe she was busy at work, she had her own like life issues, whatever. So because of the inconsistencies that I was shown from my primary caregiver as a child, now I tend to be very clingy and needy in relationships, and that's because I am scared that the person will leave. So because I'm scared the person will leave me, I cling, I am needy, you know, sometimes I'm irrational because I'm used to so much inconsistency, and that's how basically anxious attached people usually act in relationships. Is there anything I've left out?
No, yeah, definitely. You're spot on with that. And now for, I'm a bit of Sharon and a bit of now what she listed out, anxious, avoidant, and secure. And I think also, as we talk about secure is when the child knows that their primary caregiver will be there for them. So we find that people who have a secure relationship will probably have secure relationships as adults. So for me, I am attached, I'm an anxious avoidant, and that's a blend of the two, and sometimes they call it disorganized attachment. And what childhood experience brought me here is because my primary caregiver was a bit of what Sharon has described, but also they left more than they were there. Yeah. So what happens is that a child who develops avoidance, for example, is when they realize that they can't rely on their primary caregiver. Actually, one of the videos we watch, even in psychology, we observe there's an experiment that was done with children.
Yeah.
And you notice the avoidantly attached child, like whether the parent comes or doesn't come, like they have no...
They're unfazed by it.
They're unfazed, But I'm also... there's also aspects of me being anxiously attached. And how did I get here? It's because the first 2 years of my life, my primary caregiver had gone through a very intense situation, and so it is usually said that people who have disorganized attachment are brought up by either frightening or frightened parents. Yeah. So, and I can see how my primary caregiver might have been frightened because they ended up in a situation where they had to be a single parent, and they were frightened, and in turn how they brought me up, they had to leave, they had to go fend for me. So indeed I developed some of that anxiousness. But also my primary caregiver went to look for greener pastures around when I was 2 years old. And then now I discovered that, okay, I guess there's no need to attach myself to anyone really. Yeah. So remember, the first 2 years I'm anxiously attached because my primary caregiver had to leave, go fend for me. But then now they left entirely and went to a whole other continent, which I think brought about the avoidance. Yeah. And even in now my relationships right now, like I can be clingy, but I can also be like, you know what, you do you.
I don't need you.
I don't need you. I don't need. I can do battle by myself. I don't need you. So it can be very confusing because I'm like, no, don't go, don't do. But I don't want you.
Yeah, it's like hot and cold. Yeah, and I think one big thing about people who are avoidant is that they're overly independent. So, I mean, I'm all for independence. I'm all for, you don't need nobody. But like she said in the beginning of the video, human beings are relational beings. Having love is something that is categorized as a need in the hierarchy of needs. So being overly independent is not a thing we should necessarily be proud of. It's okay to want other people. It's okay to need other people. It's okay to rely on other people for love, for support, for anything. So that's basically how your childhood affects your relationship. So for you to be able to understand why your relationships are set up how they are set up, you need to look back into your childhood and what was your relationship with your primary caregiver. Was it inconsistent? Was it hot and cold? Were they physically present but emotionally absent? Or did you actually feel affirmed and loved and all of those things, which is, if you did, then you probably have a secure attachment. But the sad thing I read is that not a lot of people have secure attachments. A lot of us have one or the other, or a bit of both intertwined. So yeah, that's basically that. So I want us to dive into the next thing, which is childhood trauma. I told you I'm starting soft. So childhood trauma, for me, what I learned is that it's not necessarily the big things, because I think when we hear trauma we think big things, and that's still trauma. Sexual assault, physical abuse, all of that is trauma. But there are also small things that we don't really think are trauma, but are trauma. Yes. Do you want to tell us more about that?
Yes, definitely. And actually, what Sharon is also referring, we also refer it as adverse childhood experiences, and that's the intense ones, but indeed, very little things can be childhood trauma. It doesn't have to be the very intense ones like abuse. It can also be neglect, and sometimes we think of neglect and we think, a child left there. But sometimes a parent can be there, like Sharon is saying.
Physically they're providing for you
gifts, everything, but they're just not connecting to the child's needs, and that can be very traumatic. Even sometimes it doesn't even have to get to abuse. The threat of abuse can be traumatic, you know, when or the threat of being neglected. You know, the parents were like, nitakuacha wewe, and you are always like, oh my God, if I do something wrong, my parent is going to, and maybe they never really meant it. It's really the little things. It could be something that happened in kindergarten. It could be something that happened in a salon somewhere. It could be anything. It's really the little things that make a child feel not valued or not cared for, in as much that can be very, like, we categorize sometimes as adverse childhood experiences. So it's also even about community. There are children who got traumatized, for example, in 2007 in their homes, safe in Nairobi, not in Eldoret, because it's so. So it's also about violence. It's also about violent environments, like watching your parents fight. And so it's not necessarily always like the huge things. It's even the small things, or even just this. It doesn't even have to be consistent. It could be you watched your parents disagree intensely once, and now you're always so afraid that it will happen again. And you find that a child trying to protect their parent, trying to ensure that they're good so they never fight. It's really a lot of things, and the little things and the really huge things now, like physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional, and all those things.
I really like to give my own personal experiences on this channel, so people can understand better when it gets complex. For me, and this is something that I just discovered in therapy. I didn't even know it was a thing. But I was telling my therapist that I feel like because my mother was very critical to me, she was my biggest critic. She still is my biggest critic. But because she criticized me a lot as a child, I've realized that I've internalized that, and now I criticize people, especially the people around me, a lot as well. And it's not just the criticizing, but it's also, she said a lot of negative things, a lot of bad words to me. She, said some abusive things, to me as a child. And I don't blame her at all for any of that. I think now that I look at her as an individual who just messed up, just how I'd probably mess up when I'm a mom, I don't hold things against her. But because of those childhood experiences I had, where I internalized a lot of the negative things she called me, that affected my self-esteem, and that now I realized that I started playing the role of my mother even when she wasn't there. So with other people, I'm very critical, and even if they do something good, I still point out the one bad thing that they did, or like, like if someone did something good to me, I'd be like, oh, thanks, but you can also do this. So with her, it was always, if we achieved something in school, she'd be like, okay, yeah, you are number 3, great, but next time you have to be number 1. And those small things, because I think even now a lot of parents watching this still do that with their kids. So it's okay to just affirm your child in their number 3 spot without pressuring them to be number 1, because those things, they internalize them in very negative ways.
And I really resonate with what you're saying, Sharon, because now for me, what happened is, out of those experiences, I realized that when I was good, I received love. Now I was left now with yet another caregiver, and I realized when I was good, my caregiver was the same, would use very intense words, would really hurt me with words, but I realized okay, so if I try and be good, if I try and do what she does, then I will be loved. And what that has done for me is that now in that regard, it ended up making me feel like because I wasn't good in many things, like behaviorally I had significant challenges, like I'd be the noisemaker, but I realized teachers like smart kids. So what happened is I became an overachiever in school. And now with regards to life, I found that I'd rather make sure that I work according to what makes someone like me best, which in turn made me a people pleaser. Yes. So I ended up becoming a people pleaser because I realized love is given conditionally to good people. Or when you meet people's desires, then they love you. I receive love. So that's what happened to me. Based off those childhood experiences of only receiving love and being criticized a lot, ended up being an academic, so to speak, overachiever, or trying to compensate in that way, and also a people pleaser generally.
So even again for parents, if the only way you show your child love or affection is when they achieve something, they will internalize that, and it will make them overachievers who believe that whenever I do something good, that's when mommy or daddy shows me love. So I think that's something that we need to rethink in terms of parenting, and just work on showing your child love regardless of whether they're achieving good things or they're not achieving good things. So we don't end up becoming people pleasers like me and Maddy here who are struggling with that. But yeah, let's talk about reparenting, which is still in line with that whole entire conversation. So I think I said the word reparenting to someone recently, and they were like, what do you mean? What is reparenting? How would you describe the process of reparenting for anyone who has had a difficult childhood and they want to do better as an adult?
Yeah. I think the first thing, even before we get to what is reparenting, is even why reparenting.
Yeah.
Why reparenting? Because, you know, sometimes we look back and now we're like, our parents. But they didn't know better.
They didn't know better.
They honestly...
and their parents probably didn't know better as well. Yeah, so it's just cycle after cycle after cycle.
Yeah. So your parents, sometimes we look for... and I found this even myself, you know, trying to find the person I needed in my parent right now. Because the relationships as we get older sometimes get better. I don't know what your experience has been with your primary caregiver.
No, definitely,
Yeah. Sometimes we find like we still want that parent we needed as a child. But reparenting is... if you can put it in just an easy way, is showing up for yourself in the way you needed someone to show up for you when you were a child. Yeah.
Okay, I really like that definition, because that's something that I've been doing for I think the last 2 years now, and it's been very difficult because my innate, you know, my go-to is what I've been used to doing for the last 26 years of my life, you know. So now I'm telling my brain, okay, I know we are used to criticizing ourselves, but we're not doing that anymore. We're now speaking to ourselves with love and with tenderness and with kindness. I know we are used to dating a certain type of guy who repeats what you were shown as a child, but no, that's not what we're going for anymore, you know. So it's been a very difficult process, but at the end of the day, you need to realize that you have to show up for yourself, and stop holding it against your parents. I think that's been my biggest challenge, the forgiving and just understanding that they didn't know better. Have you like had to go through that? Like if someone is struggling with, you know, forgiveness because this was your primary caregiver and they didn't do too well of a job, how do you handle the process of forgiveness?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not easy. It's definitely not easy, and I like what I mean, just reiterating what we've been saying, that it's you realizing your parent, and even kind of like even contextualizing, even including looking at your grandparents and looking and even hearing from your parents, how did they grow up, what are some of the experiences. And when you make your parent a human being who just like you is as a result of what they went through, then it makes the forgiving a bit easier. And then you also take away the responsibility of them showing up for you. Because as you're saying, Sharon, that is your inner child, right? That is your inner child. That's the one who will date a certain guy because, you know, that's what they're used to. That's the one who is your inner self-critic. That is your inner child. That small Sharon who all she had was all that. And except now you're Sharon, the bigger person. I can give you an example. Whenever, because I was so criticized as a child, eventually when I learned to speak up for myself, I really defend myself with everything. And I believe in being understood because I did not get it as a child. So I remember even like nowadays when I'm in a situation of conflict with someone in authority, particularly, or someone who's trying to tower over me, I really defend myself. And like I realize like I defend myself so much, and if I feel like I'm not getting understood, I break down and I cry. And why? Because of my inner child. Because now I feel like I am, now that I'm going through awareness and therapy and just healing and this journey of reparenting, I realize I'm like, that this is touching on childhood trauma, of they're making me feel like that child anymore. But I'm not that child. So it could go, you could end up being like very aggressive and defensive in protecting yourself, because you still feel like that child and you're like, no, I'm no longer that child. So you defend yourself very vigorously. They've said that reparenting has some aspects. It's about, you know, discipline, you know. It's some kids who are brought up, you know, Sharon has said it rightfully, that sometimes trauma wasn't about the big things. It's even just about that your parent was there but they never did anything, so you found yourself, you know, with all this freedom, and you found yourself parenting yourself. So it's literally, so you find that even now you're not disciplined in anything because you were never accountable to anyone. So you're not disciplined with your time, you never really start that gym. Why? Because you never really had that discipline starting up. So it's literally showing up for yourself. It's in joy, it's in taking care of yourself, you know. I like Sharon has been saying, you know what, we're not doing that anymore. You know, I'm showing up for myself in this way and taking care of myself in this way. And
as we close, there's something I read, I don't remember when, but I read something that said that as adults, we often reenact or try to act out what home was like. By home, I mean not only the physical building home, but also the relationship with our parents, relationship with our siblings and whatever. So even as we, in adulthood, even as we move on from leaving our parents' home to our own home or a home with another person, we most probably try to act it out the same way, because that's what we're used to. But home, for a lot of people, wasn't always a safe place. Home doesn't always feel safe. So I think it's really important as adults, really, it's up to us for us to, you know, just break the cycle and make home a better place, a safer place. By home, I also mean our bodies, our inner selves, our minds, our souls, our hearts. Also make that a safer, better place for ourselves and our children, husbands, partners, whoever that we do end up bringing into our homes. Yeah, that's all I wanted to end with. Maddy, do you have anything to tell us as we close?
Wow, and so powerful. And how can they do that? If you can do it by yourself, Sharon has shared it's not an easy journey. And Sharon, I know you've been working with yourself and your own self-care and your own self-reparenting, but also with therapy. If you feel like this is very hard, please go for therapy. But we also know therapy
is not accessible.
So if you are willing, actually do the work. Read up. There's a lot of resources online on reparenting.
So much.
And that will be very helpful. And indeed, create the home that I guess you wanted.
That you want for yourself. I think that's so important, because I think one of the most, like, you know, Nini DM that I get is people saying, I can't afford therapy is not accessible for me, it's expensive. But I did all of this work on my own before I started therapy only brought up some other things I hadn't seen. So like Maddy said, there's a lot of resources online for you to be able to, videos you can watch, articles you can read, techniques you can use to reparent yourself, you know, things like journaling, writing to your old self, things like, you know, calling yourself out on your negative behaviors, things like just looking back into your past. And, you know, it's going to be very difficult because you'll realize that you're not always the innocent person. Sometimes you're the toxic person. And just calling yourself out and holding yourself accountable, loving yourself, giving yourself the things that you wanted your caregiver to give you. These are things you can do without the access of therapy. So don't hold back on this journey because you can't access therapy for now. But if you do want to access therapy, especially for your child, I would highly recommend Maddy. Or a teenager. It doesn't necessarily have to be a child, because you know, this is a really tough time for us, and I can only imagine how more tougher it is for children and teenagers. I think that's pretty much it. Thank you so much, Maddy, for coming. I feel like there's so many more things we haven't said. So if you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comment section down below. I'll leave Maddy's details in my description box in case you want to reach out to her, and I'll see you guys in my next video. If there's anything that you want to learn more about or are curious about, please leave that in the comment section as well. And if you want to share your story also, just leave it in the comments so we can all learn and all grow on this journey together. I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye.